president won't let it happen, that's why. I mean, we have learned one lesson, and that is that we're not going to fight any major wars in the mainland of Asia again, and we're not going to send American troops there. And we certainly aren't going to do it unless we have the American public and the Congress behind us.
This whole problem gets down to the fact that for the last year or so, we've been heavily de-escalating the undeclared war in Vietnam. At the same time, we've been heavily escalating not only the undeclared but the undisclosed war in Laos. And this is the type and character of development in a democracy that I think could be very, very dangerous indeed.
There are no American combat forces in Laos. We have been providing logistical support and some training for the neutralist government in order to avoid Laos falling under communist domination. As far as American manpower in Laos is concerned, there are none there at the present time on a combat basis. We do have aerial reconnaissance. We do have perhaps some other activities. I won't discuss those other activities at this time.
The security of all Southeast Asia will be endangered if Laos loses its neutral independence. Its own safety runs with the safety of us all, in real neutrality, observed by all. I want to make it clear to the American people and to all the world that all we want in Laos is peace, not war. A truly neutral government, not a Cold War pawn. A settlement concluded at the conference table and not on the battlefield.
Now, what President Kennedy did about Laos was to get an international agreement to cool things off. When he met Khrushchev in 1961, the one thing they agreed on was not to let Laos become an active theater of war. The result was the Geneva Accords of 1962, signed by 14 countries, including the United States, Russia, Communist China, and North Vietnam. These agreements provided for a neutral Laos governed by a coalition of 3 princes, representing the 3 main factions: Boon the conservative, Suvarnabhumi, the communist, and the neutralist Suvarnabhumi, who became premier. The agreements also called for the withdrawal of all foreign military personnel. The United States duly pulled out its 666 advisors, but the North Vietnamese only removed a token 40 of their 6,000 troops in Laos. Thereafter, Suvarnabhumi and the communists walked out of the coalition government, and with their Pathet Lao forces stiffened by increasing numbers of North Vietnamese regulars, they've been holding 2/3 of the country and 1/4 of the Laotian population ever since. The purely Laotian forces on either side are generally considered mediocre and unaggressive. The best on the government side are the clandestine army, commanded by General Phang Pao and fully paid, equipped, and advised by the United States. The Pathet Lao, although trained in North Vietnamese tactics and equipped with Russian and Chinese weapons, are not considered very formidable either. Left to themselves, the opposing Laotian forces would probably cancel each other out. The crucial factor in the equation is the 67,000 North Vietnamese regulars President Nixon says are in Laos now, in direct violation, the President says, of the 1962 Geneva Agreements. In spite of American equipment, advice, and above all, air power, the North Vietnamese hold the military initiative in Laos today. The United States is said to be flying an average of 500 air sorties a day, sometimes as many as 20,000 a month against targets in Laos. Most of these strikes come from U.S. bases across the Mekong River in Thailand. The White House said we made our first B-52 strike last month. But U.S. air power has still not been enough to do more than slow down the North Vietnamese forces. In the past couple of weeks, they have moved deeper into government territory than they ever have. Bernard Kalb reports on the resulting situation and what it means.
Laos has a way of vanishing for a few months each year. That's usually when the monsoon rains begin, about May. That's when the war dies down, when the world forgets that Laos even exists. But then, with the dry season, one side or the other starts up the war again, and Laos recurs, so to speak. And that's the situation right now. The North Vietnamese have just retaken the strategic Plain of Jars. These are Laos's newest refugees being evacuated just before the communists moved in. The most tragic victims of the seesaw, not-so-secret war in Laos are the refugees. The official estimate is that about 1 out of every 4 Laos has been a refugee, more than 600,000 of them. Some have been refugees more than once. Laos has the most displaced national population in the world. Some of these Lao refugees were relieved to get away from the war, but there are reports that some were encouraged to go, to deny the communists the manpower of these people. What goes through the minds of these refugees?
Well, I've talked with hundreds of refugees from towns and villages all over northeastern Laos in the last 6 months. What they talk most about is American bombing, being told by the male soldiers of the Royal Lao government side to leave their villages, and having to do porterage, that is, carrying arms and food for Pathet Lao soldiers. The thing they're most concerned about is the bombing, and particularly American bombing. Until 1967, Lao bombing by T-28s outnumbered was greater than American bombing. But starting in 1968, and particularly in 1969, after President Johnson stopped the bombing in North Vietnam and diverted the jets into Laos, American bombing has been a constant day and night affair for the refugees. They say that the planes came over all the time, shot at everything: people, cows, buffaloes, houses, rice fields, schools. They say that there were ordinary bombs, napalm, phosphorus, and anti-personnel bombs. They all say that they've lived for the last 2 years, mostly underground.
What about American military fighter bombers, planes operating out of Thailand, attacking North Vietnamese positions in northeast Laos? Can you comment on that?
Oh, I have no comment on that at all. We are the armed reconnaissance, but that has nothing to do with bombing or anything.
Any comment on the reports of an escalated American military commitment, reports of larger bombers, B-52s operating? Could you comment on any of that, sir?
Well, I just might make a comment. We have no commitment in Laos. Our military assistance and materiel is being supplied pursuant to the request of the Royal Lao government and in consonance with the Geneva Agreements of 1962.
But to any question that would request an itemization of American military involvement, what would be the official American reply here, sir?
Oh, there'd certainly be no comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. The official American establishment in Laos is very much on the defensive on these sensitive matters. But one American reporter, based in Vientiane, recently managed to slip into Long Cheng, the top-secret CIA-supported base for guerrilla operations against the communists.
Basically, Long Cheng is a logistics base. They fly things in there in big planes and fly them out to the front, small planes. This includes soldiers. We saw half a dozen transport planes there, DC-3s, Caribous. The strip can take bigger ones. We saw about a dozen T-28 unmarked single-engine propeller bombers. These are flown by Lao and male pilots, but the Americans do all the maintenance, and these planes are part of a pool that runs out of Thailand, so an American pilot will shuttle them back and forth. The real thing they want to keep secret there, most of all, is that the U.S. Air Force runs Jolly Green Giant rescue helicopters out of there. This is an admission that the U.S. bombs Laos, and you can hear the American jets roaring overhead, and they lose about 10 or 12 Americans a month here.
Are there more Long Chengs in Laos?
Nothing as big as Long Cheng, but there are these little CIA hideaways tucked in the hills. There are a lot, over a couple, half a dozen or so, over on the Bolavens Plateau. These are used for trail watching, maybe sending in some people to cause mischief once in a while. There are others up by the Chinese border. There are literally nearly, well, there are hundreds of little dirt runways in Laos, and these are used for military purposes by the United States.
By controlling the arms and the money, the U.S. in effect controls the war. Buildings like these house the Requirements Office, which is said to be a kind of camouflaged military assistance group. There is a variety of unarmed air support provided by Air America and Continental Air Services, which are usually referred to as CIA airlines. They admit to operating more than 100 planes and helicopters, but they are not as forthcoming as to the exact nature of all their assignments. They ferry cargo and military supplies around the country. They also transport military personnel. The people of Vientiane and Laos have been described as the least urgent souls on earth. To hurry, to be desperate or frantic, the way a Westerner might be in the face of crisis, is looked upon with national embarrassment as a confession of human bankruptcy.